Hi friends, my name is Baji. Welcome back to our channel. In the previous video, we explored different types of thread groups that can help us to design the different load testing scenarios. If you haven't watched that video yet, I highly recommend watching it first and then continuing this video. In today's video, we will explore the procedure for creating custom Groovy code snippets using JSR223 elements. So let's get started right away. You must be thinking why to use Groovy and why to write custom scripting in JMeter, right? Typically, by leveraging the available JMeter elements and plugins, we can build a test plan that can meet a wide range of requirements. However, in certain scenarios, the built-in functionality may fall short and require the creation of custom scripts. The preferred approach for scripting in JMeter is using Groovy because it implements the compilable interface. While we may be skilled at Groovy scripting, it is important not to complicate things unnecessarily. Custom coding should only be used when the existing elements do not meet the requirements. Okay, now let's understand where exactly we can write the custom logic using Groovy in JMeter. Within JMeter, various JSR223 elements are available. So we can make use of any of these elements to write the required custom code or script based on the requirement. Okay, to write the custom script, we can leverage different JMeter supported variables. Now let's look at those variables. First one, log. The log variable can be used to write any data or information to the JMeter log file. This log file will be available in JMeter bin directory. This approach is really handy for debugging issues during scripting activities. Next, we have out. It is similar to log. Instead of writing the data to jmeter.log file, we can display the output to the JMeter console. Next, we have vars. Vars variable can be used to read and write to JMeter variables. We can pass these variables in the script to meet the requirements. Just to let you know that these variable assignments can support only a single thread group. Next, we have props. Props variable works very similar to vars. The main difference is that it will try to read or write the JMeter properties. In addition to that, they can read or write on multiple thread groups. Next one, prev. This variable can be used to check the content of the previous sampler results. That means it can be used in post-processor elements so that we can obtain the required information after the sampler execution. Next one, CTX. It helps to gain the access to the JMeter execution context. With CTX, we can get some information of the previous sampler, the thread group, or the JMeter engine, etc. Next one, sampler. Using this variable, we can retrieve or modify the required information on the sampler before its execution. So we will use get to retrieve the information about the sampler and set to modify the information. The final one from our list is sampler results. It is similar to sampler. The only difference is that it will be used to get or set the values of the sampler post execution. Now let's quickly go over some example code snippets that involves various explained variables for better understanding. Okay, so let's open the JMeter to start the variable examples discussion. So I have a sample script already opened in my JMeter with the name JSR223 underscore demo. So in this script, I have a test plan with one thread group, which I named it as JSR223 thread group, because in this demo, we are going to discuss about JSR223 elements. And then I have one user defined variables with bunch of variables, which we will be using later in this demo. And to view the results, I have added a view results tree listener. Okay, just to let you know that in this demo, we are not going to cover all the Groovy programming concepts because that was already covered as part of module 5. If anybody wants to learn those concepts, please watch all the videos in module 5. Okay, so in this demo, our main focus is to go through the variable code examples, which will be commonly used in our JMeter custom scripts. Okay, so to write any custom script in JMeter, we need to have JSR223 elements. So first, let's add the JSR223 sampler. So to add a sampler to thread group, we need to right click the thread group and then select add sampler and then select JSR223 sampler. So same like other elements, it has a name and then comment section to give more meaningful name and add additional information about this particular sampler. And then we have scripting language. By default, Groovy is selected because this is the recommended language by JMeter for writing any custom scripts. If you want to select any other language, you can click the drop down and then choose the appropriate one. And then we have parameters section where we can define the parameters which will be passed to the script. We also have a script file section where we can override the script, and then the script window. This is is where we will write all the custom scripts. Okay, so first let's start with the log variables. Since this sampler is going to be used for log variable discussions, let's name this sampler name as log example. Okay, the log variable will be used to display or write the content to the jmeter.log file, because while developing the scripts we can use that log file for debugging purposes. Okay, so the basic syntax to write log variable is, first we need to write log dot and then log level. We have different types of log level available, so that when JMeter is trying to write this particular output into log, it will use that appropriate log level. Okay, here we need to write log level, and then within parenthesis double quotation we need to type the message. So this is the basic syntax to write a message or text into jmeter.log file. Okay, so to comment any of the code that we have written in the script, we can use double slash. If I want to comment this particular line, I should type 2 backward slash. That will comment the line, so that when we execute the script, JMeter will not execute this particular line. Okay, so now let's look at the example. So let's print some message into the JMeter log. So let's type log. We want this as a info message, so that is why I'm using info as a log level, and then within the parenthesis this is example1 message. Okay, if you want we can also use multiple log messages, so let's type example2 message. So let's save it and run the script. If you go to view results, log example is successful because there is nothing much to execute. This is the request. In the response you don't see anything, because in the log example sampler script we write couple of lines which will write the message into jmeter.log file. So to view that log file we have multiple options available. We can select the options and then select the log viewer, or we can also select the log viewer triangular option, which will open the log viewer panel. Okay, so if we go through this log we can see these messages. So these are the two messages that we were trying to display it in the jmeter.log file. Okay, so if you want to write anything to log level you should use this log variable. Okay, so let's write another example. So this time what we will do is we will define a variable, and then we will try to print the content of the variable inside the log viewer. So to define a variable we will use def keyword, and then the variable name, let's name it as language, and then store Groovy inside the variable. This time we will try to display hello space variable name. Okay, so let's save it, clear the results, and then run the script. So this time we can see hello Groovy. Okay, so you can also write the same statement this way. So the only difference is if you are writing outside of the double quotation you can use the concatenation symbol, which is plus and then the variable name. But if you are trying to use the variable inside the double quotation, then you should use dollar opening curly braces and the variable name and the closing curly braces. Both will give the same output. It's just achieving the same output in a different way. Okay, so you can use this way or this way to display something into log viewer. Okay, as I said we have different log levels, right? So let's use that example. So this is info message, and then we will say one, this is one message, and we can say log dot error, this is error message. Okay, so let's save it and then run it. Now if you observe here we can see that there is one error in the log, because we try to display this message using the error log level. That is why it is showing 1 here. Okay, so if you go to the log viewer you can see all those 3 messages. So this is info 1 error. So using this log you can write something to jmeter.log file, which you can use it later for debugging purposes. Okay, this is all about log variable. Let's disable this and also disable the sampler. So don't worry, I will share all these code examples in the notes. I would recommend everyone to type these examples instead of copying directly from the notes, so that you will also get some practice. Okay, so the next variable that we are going to discuss is out. So let's add another JSR223 sampler so that we can separate the examples. So let's name this as out example. So in this script we will try to write all the examples of out. Basically the out example works very similar to log. The only difference is that the message or the content will be displayed in the console. Okay, now let's understand the basic syntax. First we need to write out all with uppercase and then dot println, and within parenthesis and double quotation we should type the message. So this is the basic syntax of out. So once you execute this, what it will do is it will try to display whatever the content that we have typed inside the double quotation into JMeter console. So let's comment this out and then let's write an example and let's save it. Before running the script, let's open the console so that we can see the message here. Let's run this. Now if you see here, we have the sample message. You can also write directly println without out. It will do the same thing. So instead of writing out.println, you can directly type println sample message without out. Okay, so let's save and rerun it. So the first sample message is using out, and then second one is without out. We can also use this out variable to display the content of the variable. So let's define a variable called message, and then say out will be display the output to console, and then we can use println message, or we can use out.println message. Let's run the script. So both will display the output to the JMeter console. So this is all about out variable. And the next variable that we are going to discuss is vars. Again, we need to have a JSR223 sampler to discuss the sample code. So let's add a JSR223 sampler and name it as vars example. Okay, so vars variable will be used to read the JMeter variable or write something to variables. Okay, so the basic syntax of vars is vars.get and then variable name. This is to read the values from the existing JMeter variables, and then we have vars.put variable name comma value. This is to create a new JMeter variable. Okay, so we will use get to read the values of JMeter variables and then put to create a new JMeter variables. So we have a debug sampler which will be used to read the values of JMeter variables, properties, and so on. So let's add that here. By default, JMeter variables is selected as true. Let's leave it as true so that when we execute the script, we can also see the variable information in the debug sampler output. Okay, so let's go back to our vars example. Now what we will do is we will try to read the value of one of the variable that we have in the user defined variable. Let's try to read the URL value from the vars example JSR223 sampler. Okay, so first what we will do is we will define a variable called app URL, and then we will try to get the content of the JMeter variable that we have in the user defined variables. We will get the value of this URL and then we'll store that into app URL. Okay, now let's display the output in the log viewer saying that application URL is app underscore URL. Okay, so let's save this, open the log viewer and run the script. So if we see the output, we can see application URL is https petstore.octoperf.com. So if you go to user defined variables, you can see the same value, right? So this vars.get is helping us to read what are the value inside this URL, and then we are storing that into app underscore URL variable, and finally we are displaying that to log viewer. Okay, so even if you go to view registry and then select the debug sampler, here also we can see all the JMeter variables that we have in the user defined, like URL, num, token, user ID, password, right? If you see the debug sampler response body, so you can see the URL here and then password, token, user ID, num, everything is displaying here. So whatever the variables that we have created are creating using JSR223 sampler, we can also see it here. Okay, next we will try to create a new variable using vars.put. Let's define a new variable called message, and then inside that message we will store hello groovy, and then we'll say vars.put, and then we need to give the variable name. So we will say message var, and then we will store the message. Okay, now when you execute this script, you will not see anything in the log viewer because we are not writing anything to the log viewer, right, using log.info. However, if you go back to view results and then select the debug sampler, here we can see that variable message var hello groovy. So you can use this variable same like other JMeter variables in the script. So you can use this message var in your script based on the need. Okay, now we will do some calculations so that we will understand some other concepts as well. So by default, all the JMeter variables are stored with a string type, so we cannot directly use them in any calculations. Before we use them into calculation, we need to convert them to integer. So in Java or Groovy, to convert any string to integer, we have a function called toInteger. We can use this toInteger method to convert any string data type to an integer data type. Okay, similarly, if you want to convert integer to string, then you can use toString method. First, let's define a variable called number, and then we will store the value of this num. Okay, so we will try to read this num variable inside the script. So to read any variable, we will use vars.get and then the variable name. As I said, by default, whatever the value that JMeter try to read from this num variable will be a string data type. We want to store an integer into number so that we can use this number for calculations, right? So to convert this string data type to to integer, we should add dot to integer. So that way, before JMeter store this value of num into number, it will try to convert that into integer and then it will store it to number. Okay. Next, let's define another variable called sum. Then we will say number plus 20. So that means whatever the value inside the number, we are trying to add 20 to it, and then we are storing that total into sum. Now let's put this sum into a new JMeter variable called new sum. Okay, so we are using var.put to create a new variable with the name new sum and then storing the results of sum. Okay, and again, JMeter variable is a string data type, and in sum we are having the integer data, so we need to convert this back to string. So to string, opening and closing parenthesis. So this is the way you can use to integer to string and do some calculations. So let's clean up the results and rerun the script. We don't see anything here because we don't have any log statements here. So go back to view results and then debug sampler. Here we can see new sum equal to 30 because the num has 10 and we are adding 20, so 20 plus 10 equal to 30. Okay, we can also generate some random numbers and then store them into JMeter variables because that is the common scenarios that we generally need to handle it in this script. Let's try to understand how to write that random number generation code here. So to generate any random number, we need to import the random class from Java util package. So import java util.random. This is the syntax to import any particular class to this particular script, and then we need to create a random object for that random class so that we can access all the methods defined inside that class. Okay, then we will define a new variable called random, and then we will say ran.nextInt. NextInt is a method defined inside the random class. If you are more interested to know what are all the different methods available in any given class, so what you will do is open your browser and then type java random class and go to the official website of Oracle, which will have all the information about this class. So this is the class random, and then if you scroll a little bit down, we have a couple of constructors, and then these are all the different methods. So if you scroll a little bit down, we can see the next int method. Okay, so if you are looking for any integer random number, then you should use the next int. So if you click this, we have more information about this particular next int. We have two method signatures, one without any parameters and one with parameters. So we can also specify boundary, so that what this particular code will do is it will try to return a random number within that boundary. Okay, so let's go back to JMeter and then we will specify boundary as 50. So that means it will return the random number from 0 to 50. If you want to have a random number between 0 to 100, then you should add plus 50. Let's print the output into log. So let's type log info. The random number is random and then closing parenthesis and close. Okay, so now let's execute this code and then see what is the output. So the random number is 93. Let's clear the results and rerun again. This time we got 78. Okay, so if you remove this 50, then the random number will be 0 to 50. This time 25, 28, 1. Okay, so you can use this code to generate any random number and then use that random number in the script. So if you want to store this into a variable, then we can use the var.put and then say random num and then store random. Okay, so this is the way you can store the random number into this random num variable. Okay, so if you run this script, it is showing random number 24, and then if you go back to view results tree debug sampler, you can also see the random num equal to 24. Okay, you can also combine these two lines into a single line. So let's say diff random equal to new java dot util dot random dot next int and then 50. This is exactly same as what we are doing here. We are creating an object to class and then we are accessing one of the method and storing the output into a variable, and we combine two activities in one single statement. So if I comment this and then rerun the same script, I should be getting the same output. See, random number 43. Okay, so you can either use this way or this way. Both will give you the same output. So this is all about vars. So the next variable is props. Again, let's add the JSR223 sampler to write the props code. Let's name it as props example. So if you go back to debug sampler, we have three options. One is JMeter variables and another one is JMeter properties and then system properties. So if you want to see what are all the JMeter properties, then you should change the value of this JMeter properties to true. Okay, so let's save and quickly rerun the script. So if you go to view registry and then props and then debug sampler, you can also see all the JMeter properties. So these are all the different JMeter properties. So using props, we can access any of these JMeter properties. So the syntax for reading the properties is props.get and then property name. So this is very similar to vars. In the previous example vars, we are trying to read the JMeter variables. Here we are trying to read the property. Okay. And then if you want to write something to a new property, then we should use put. So props.put and then property name and value. Okay. So this is the basic syntax of reading a property or creating a new property. So now what we will do is let's try to read one of the JMeter property. So let's go back to view registry and then we will try to read the JMeter version first. So let's go back to props example code and then type props.get and then what is the variable name? JMeter.version. Okay. And then we will try to display this in the log viewer. So log.info JMeter version is and then plus. Okay, so let's save this and run the script. Now we can see the output here. JMeter version is 5.6.2. If you go back to view registry and then debug sampler, look for JMeter properties, JMeter version, so 5.6.2. Using props.get, you can read any of those properties. Let's try to read the another property. So go back to view registry and then let's read this remote host. So we will change the message as remote host and then we need to type the remote host. Clear the results and run the script. So we can also see the remote host configured is 127.0.0.1. Okay, so you can use props.get to read any JMeter properties. Similarly, if you want to write something to properties, you can use put. So let's say props.put my new property and then the value abc123. Okay, now let's save the script and then clear the results and run the script. This time we don't see anything in the log viewer because we are not using any log statement here. However, if you go back to view registry, debug sampler and then properties, here we can see my new property equal to abc123. Okay, so this is the way you can read the properties and also create a new properties. So that's pretty much about props. Now let's look at the next variable, which is, so this preview variable will only work with post processor element, so we cannot use them in JSR223 sampler. Okay, for that reason, let's quickly add a HTTP request. So let's go to sampler and then select HTTP request sampler. So we will be using petstore homepage as an example here. So let's type petstore.octoperf.com and then we can specify path and this is get method. Okay, let's quickly run this to see whether we are getting the right output. So if you go back to petstore, we are getting HTTP 200, we are getting the right output. Okay, so now we will add JSR223 post processor to this sampler so that we can go through the pre-variable examples. To add a post processor, right click the sampler, add, select post processor and then select JSR223 post processor. So first we'll try to display the thread group name using prev. So to retrieve a thread group name, we should type prev.get thread name. Okay, and then let's display the output into log. So let's add log.info and say thread group name is and then closing parenthesis. Okay, so let's clean up the results and rerun the script. Now we can see thread group name is JSR223 thread group because that is the thread group name. So if you want to get the thread group name, so you can use prev.get thread name. Similarly, if you want to get the response time of the sampler, you can use prev.get time. Okay, by default it will return long data type. Okay, first let's display the output and run the script. So we are seeing response time is 347 milliseconds. So if you want, we can also add here milliseconds, which will be more meaningful. Response time is 355 milliseconds, but whatever the 355 is long data type. Okay, so if you are trying to store this into a variable, we need to convert that into a string, then only we can store them, otherwise JMeter will throw some exception. So let's try to store them without converting. So where start put, let's say the variable name is rest time and then prev.get time. Okay, and if we run the script, we will be seeing some exception. Here if you see, this is the exception. It is complaining that missing method exception. So it is complaining again that it is applicable for argument type string. Okay, but the value what we are getting here is the long, so that is why it is complaining. To fix this exception, we need to convert this to string. So type dot to string, and then if you clear it up and rerun the script, then we will not be seeing any issues here. So we have a response time 347. Since we stored it in a variable, we can go to view results and then debug sampler. We can also see rest time variable. Okay, and we can also get the sampler URL using get URL method. So again, let's display this. Okay, and then we also can get response headers using preview.get response headers. These are all different methods that we can use with preview. Okay, let's also display them, and we can also get the response code using preview.get response code. So you can use all these output in your script based on the requirement. I'm just showing here how we can use preview to get different things from the sampler execution. Okay, so let's save this, clean up the results and rerun the script. There is a typo here, that is why we got the exception. So let's clean up again. This time we don't have any error. So URL is this, and then response headers is this. So if you want to display this into a new line, then what we can do is we can add /n, so that will create a new line. So let's clean up this again, rerun the script now. This time we can see all the headers in one place. So these are all the response headers we are getting using this preview.get response headers, and then we also get the response code 200. Okay, so until now we try to get different things from the sampler executions like URL, response headers, response code, time, etc. Right? We can also set similar things to the sampler. For example, let's say if you want to set the response code as 404, then we can type preview.set response code, and within parentheses we need to specify the response code. Okay, so let's clear the results and rerun the script. This time what will happen is if you go to view results tree, pet store homepage, and then sampler results, the response code is 404 because we set that up using post processor element. So if we change it to 500, then JMeter will display that pet store homepage response code as 500. Okay, now we will try to write one real-time example. Let's say we want to compare our sampler execution response time with our SLA. If it is beyond the given SLA, then we want JMeter to report the sampler status as failure. Okay, so first let's define response time variable using prev get time. We can get the response time, right? And then we will convert them to integer because we want to compare with some integer number. And then let's quickly display the response time so that we know what is the response time. Response time is, and then say response time. Okay, next we will define a variable response time SLA. Here we will store the response time SLA. Let's say the SLA is 200 milliseconds, and then we can write the if condition, if response time greater than response time SLA. So that means if the sampler execution response time is greater than this SLA, then what we want to do is we want response message like the response time is beyond the given SLA, and we also want to set successful is false so that JMeter will not consider the request as success. It will make it as fail. And then we will also change the response code as 500, and then we will also update the response data. Set response data, the expected response time is response time SLA, but it took response time as milliseconds. Okay, so here what we are doing is we are first getting the response time, and then we are comparing that with the SLA. If it is greater than the given SLA, then we are making the sampler request as failure and with some messages. Okay, so let's clean up the results and then rerun the script. We don't have any failures. We can see what is the response time, 346 milliseconds, which is beyond our SLA. So if we go back to view results tree, the request is failed with the response code 500, and the message is the response time is beyond the given SLA. If we go to the response data, because we already set the response data, right? So here we can see the expected response time is 200 milliseconds, but it took 346 milliseconds. So you can also modify the sampler execution result using this custom code. Okay, and for some reason if you want to set some specific time to sampler execution, then you can also achieve that using preview method. So let's quickly look that now. So let's say you want your sampler response time always as 10 seconds, then what you can do is you can write this code. First let's define new time using new date. So we are using the date class here, and then we are saying previous set start time is new time dot get time. So we are using a get time method from date class as our start time, and also we are saying set end time new time dot get time plus 10,000. So here what we are doing is first we are trying to get the current time as our start time, and then we are also getting the same current time as a end time, and on top of that we are adding additional 10,000. So now let's log this time. So let's clean up these and then rerun the script. Now if you see here, the response time is 10,000 milliseconds. If we comment out these 3 lines and then rerun the script, you will see the actual response time. So actual response time is 350, but with this code we are trying to modify the response time as well. Okay, so if you have such requirements to have some specific response time to the sampler execution, then you can make use of date class and write the code this way. Okay, so this is all about prev. Next we will look at the CTX variable. So same like previous variable, this CTX variable will also only works with JSR223 post processor element. So if you want to write some code using CTX variable, you need to add JSR223 post processor. So let's copy the pet store sampler and paste it again. So what we will do is we will rename it as CTS example and then enable these two elements. We will delete all the prev code here. So CTX will also work similar to prev. We can get the JMeter context. So if you go to browser and then look for JMeter context, so these are all the different methods that we can access using the CTX variable. Okay, so we can access the JMeter engine information, we can see the previous sampler information, properties, thread group name. Okay, all this can be accessed using the CTX. So let's go back to JMeter. So if you want to access the current sampler information, we should be using ctx.getCurrentSampler. So that will give you the current sampler information. Okay, so let's clean up the results and rerun the script. Here the current sampler class is, it is basically capturing the URL of the current sampler. Okay, and if you want to access the JMeter engine information, then you should be using ctx.getEngine. It will help us to get the JMeter engine class information. So let's clear the results and rerun the script. Now we can see the JMeter engine class, which is org Apache JMeter engine. Okay, so this is the JMeter engine class. And same like pre variable, if you want to get the previous response message, code, URL, response time, you can also use this ctx.getPrevious results, and then you can specify the method like get response data string, get response code to get the response code, get URL to get the URL, get time to get the previous response time. That is why I said like CTX also works similar to previous. You can either use prev. So if you are planning to use prev, you don't need to type ctx.get previous results. You can directly type prev.get response code, get URL, get time. Okay, but this is also another way to get the same information using a different variable. Again, if you want to get the thread information like the thread group name, you can also type get thread.get thread name. Okay, so let's save this and then rerun the script. We can get everything here. So we are saying the response message is this. So this is the actual server response. We got the entire server response using this get response data as a string method, and then we have the response code of the sampler execution. So if we go back to view result tree and then pet store homepage sampler results, so this is the response code. Okay, and then we have the URL information. We also got the time, thread group name. So based on the need, you can use any of this method, or you can go to the official website and then look for the respective method. Okay, so this is all about CTX variable. Next we will look at the sampler variable. So this sampler variable will only works with the JSR223 pre-processor element. So you need to add a pre-processor if you want to write some code using sampler variable. Okay, so let's copy this and then paste it. Let's enable this and also delete the post processor because we will add the pre-processor element. So right click the sampler, add JSR223 preprocessor. So here you will write all the code related to sampler. We have different methods available to get the sampler information. So if you want to get the sampler name, you can use sampler.sample, and if you want to get the domain information, you can use the sampler.getDomain. If you want to get the path of the sampler, then you can use the get path. If you want to get the port information, you can use the get port, and the protocol using get protocol, get method to get the sampler method. Okay, so if you go back to HTTP request, so we can get all this information using this sampler method. Okay, so let's rerun the script. We can see the output here. So the sampler name is pet store homepage, which is nothing but the name of the HTTP request, and then get domain. Domain is petstore.octoperf.com. If you go back to sampler, the server name or IP is the domain, so that is what it is getting, and the path is, this is actually the path, and the port number is 443 because by default HTTPS will use 443, and then the protocol is HTTPS and the method is get. So if you want to get this kind of sampler information, then you can use sampler. The reason for adding preprocessor element is here, that this sampler will only get the information before actual sampler execution. Okay, until now we have added all our code to post process. That means that code will be executed after the sampler execution, but with sampler, by adding it to preprocessor, these things will be executed even before the sampler execution. Okay, so that is the difference. So far we have used this get method to get the sampler information. We can also update the sampler configuration using the sampler.set method, so that we don't need to go to HTTP request and then modify the configuration, open the JMeter official website without modifying the HTTP sampler configuration. So we can do that using our set methods. So let's say this is the official Apache JMeter website. So we can set the domain as jmeter.apache.org and set path as this because we want to launch the home page, and set port as 443, protocol as HTTPS, set method as get. So everything is pretty much same. When you are trying to use set, then JMeter will try to overwrite all the HTTP configuration that we have in the HTTP request page with these values. Okay, whereas get means it will try to get whatever the information that we have configured here. Now if you go to the view results and then pet store homepage, and if you see the response data, this is actually JMeter official website. This is not the pet store. Okay, so to confirm that, from the text drop down select the HTML option, and here we can see all the Apache JMeter information. Even though we have pet store server information configured in the HTTP request, through script we try to modify it with JMeter Apache arg. That is why JMeter is showing the Apache JMeter information. Okay, so you can use this sampler set methods to set the configurations of the HTTP request. So that's all about sampler variable. Now let's look at the next variable, which is sampler result. So to write the code using sampler result, we need to have a JSR223 sampler. So let's disable these two elements, add a new sampler element, JSR223 sampler, rename it as sampler result example. Okay, JMeter sampler result is a class. So if you want to know more about that, so you can go to Google and then say JMeter sampler result class. So go to the official website. So here we can see the sample class result, and then there are so many different methods. We can use all these methods to meet the desired requirement. First we will try to get this sampler response time and then response message. Okay, to get a sampler response code using sample result variable, we should type sample result dot get response code. So this will get the response code of this JSR223 sampler after the execution. Okay, so this code will be executed after the sample execution, and then we can also use get response message to get the response message. So let's clean up the results and then rerun the script. See, the response code is 200 and the message is okay. And you can also set the response code using sample result. So let's say if you want to set the response code as 201, then you can write this code as sample result dot set response code 200. So let's clean up the results and rerun the script. Now if you go to view results tree and then sample result example and go to sample result, you see the code as 201. Okay, so same like response code, we can also set the response message and response data. So we should write sample result dot set response message, and within parentheses we should write the message. And similarly for set response data, you should write sample result dot set response data, and within brackets we should write the message. Okay, and this is the character encoding that we should write along with the message. So let's clean up the results and rerun the script. If you go back to view results and then sampler result example, here we can see the response code is 201, and this is the message that we have set it up. Previously it was showing as okay, but now since we updated as this message written from the JSR223 script as a response message, that is why it updated here. And then if you go to response data, we can see the actual message that we set it up in the code. Okay, so using these different methods, you can get the sampler result as well as set sampler result to some specific configuration. So using this get and set methods, you can work with the sampler result. Okay, so this is all about sample result variable. So with this, we have completed all the variables, and now what we will do is we will look at some common miscellaneous other examples that we generally use for custom scripting. Okay, so let's disable this and add a new JSR223 sampler. Let's say miscellaneous examples. The first example is if you want to write something to a file, then we can write some custom code using Groovy, then we can achieve that. Okay, to save some time, I have already written this code. So for any file operations, we need to import these classes. So these are all Java input output classes like buffer writer, file editor, and IO exceptions. And then next what we did is here we have defined a variable with the data type string. You can also type def because we are using Groovy, or you can use even string. Anything will work. Let's keep it as string, make it more readable. First we have defined a variable name called file name, and inside that we stored the file path. After I execute this script, I want a new file to be created in this path, okay, with the name file.csv. And then inside that file I want to store some values. The values that I am getting using vars.get. So we have some user defined variables like token, user ID, password, and I want all these values to be stored into a file. So that is why I am using vars.get to get that values, and then I am creating a new file object to file class. So this is required whenever we are trying to do some file operations. So we should write file and then the object name equal to new file class name and then the file name. And after that we need to create file writer object. So I'm using the file writer class to create the file writer objects and then specifying the file path. And then next we are creating a buffer writer objects. Again we are pointing that to the file writer. After that what we are doing is we are checking if the file exists. If it exists, then it won't do anything, otherwise it will create a new file. Okay, basically if the file is already there, it will try to overwrite with the content, otherwise it will try to create a new file and then update the content. So after that we are trying to write the data using that buffered object. So we should write bw.write is the method, and then within the brackets we need to specify the data. So the data stores the value of these things, right? So and finally we are closing the buffered object. So we should always close the objects that we have created to avoid any memory related issues. So this is the code example if you want to write the data to a file. Okay, so let me go back to my downloads folders and then see. Let me delete this file and then let's run this script. No exceptions, and then if I go back to my downloads folder, I can see the file.csv. Okay, so if I open this with any text edit, so we can see the actual output. Okay, so these are the values that we have in the user defined variables, like token is abcd1234, user ID is test user, and password is test password. Sometimes we also need to read the content from a file. So let's say we have a file called file.txt. Let's go back to downloads folder. So I have a file called file.txt. Let me open this file in a text edit. Is the content that we have in this file.txt. So what I'm going to do is I will try to read this content using the custom script. So here first we need to specify the path, and then again we are creating a file object and then using that file path as a parameter and also using .text. What it will do is it will try to copy the entire content of the file path into this file content variable, and then after that trying to display the output into log viewer. Okay, let me clean up this results and then rewrite the script so I can see the output here. The file content is this. Okay, so this is another thing that we generally do, reading the data from a file. So you can use this code to do so. And sometimes we also need to work with date and time. Sometimes we need to format the date into a specific format. So in such cases we can use this piece of code to format the date in the required format. So here we are using two Java packages, local date time and then date formatter, and we are importing them to this code. And then what we are doing here is we are trying to get the current date and time using the local date time class and then now method and storing that into a current date time variable. After that we are formatting that current date time using the format method. So we have a date time formatter .of pattern. Here we can specify the format that we want. So what JMeter will do is it will try to take the value inside this current date time variable and then format it to this specific format. And again I'm storing that into a different variable called formatted date time. So we can see the current date time and format date time. Okay, so let's clean up the results and print. So if you see here, this is the by default current date time that we are getting when we try to use this local date time now, and we are formatting that date to this specific format. So YYYY means year, so 2024, and then dash double capital M means it will print the month number, and then the date DD, and then space and then time. Okay, so you can use this. You can use the format method to format the date into required format. Sometimes we also need to convert the current date time into epoch format. Basically, if you go back to Google and then type epoch time converter, select any one of the website. So this is the epoch time for the current date and time. So when we record the scripts using JMeter or loadrunners, the tool sometimes will record the epoch timing. So in that case, we may need to convert the current date time into epoch time and then replace that in the script. Okay. So to convert the current date time into this epoch time format, we can use this particular code. Here again, we are importing some Java packages like instant, local date and time, and zone ID. So the local date and time is to get the current date time. Again, here also we are trying to store that current date time into a current date time variable, and then we are using add zone method from the current date time object to get the epoch time. Okay, and then storing that value into this epoch time millis, and then after that we are trying to print the result. Okay, so you need to use the add zone and then couple of other methods called toInstant and toEpoch mills to convert the current date time into epoch time. So let's clean up the results and rerun the script. So here we can see this, the epoch time in milliseconds. Okay, you can store this into a variable and then you can use that variable in the JMeter script. Sometimes we also need to convert the dates into different time zones, like from UTC to ETC or ETC to UTC, because sometimes the application is deployed in a ETC time zone system and our load generators are using UTC time zone. So that time there might be some issue. That's where we need to manage those times and date formats as per the target system. Okay, so to convert those time zones, we can make use of this code. First, we are trying to import some datetime packages which will help us to do this conversion, and then we are defining an UTC, and then we are defining a UTC date. After that, we are creating a simple date format object, and then we are setting up the time zone to UTC, and after that we are parsing the date and using the simple date format object and then storing that into UTC date. And after that again we are doing the same steps for creating the ETC format object and then setting up the time zone to ETC, and finally we are taking that UTC date and then formatting as per the ETC time zone and then storing it into ETC date time string. Finally we are printing both UTC and ETC dates. Okay, so let me clean up the results and rerun the script. So here we can see the UTC date time is this. So this is what we have given in the beginning. This is the ETC date time. Okay, so if you notice in the script which is not matching with your system date and time, then that means that particular time is in a different time zone. You need to understand which time zone it is, and then you can make use of this particular piece of code to convert to the target time zone format and then replace in the script. Okay, so these are all different examples. These are not the only example that we will use it. There may be more, but I just wanted to give some high level understanding of JSR223 elements and then how we can write code using different variables. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you so much for staying till the end and supporting me. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions or want to share your experiences, please feel free to leave a comment below. All the video notes have been uploaded in GitHub and you can find the link in the description. If you are new to our channel, please consider subscribing and also like and share this video with others so that they will also get benefited. I'll see you with the next video in this module. Until then, take care, stay safe and keep learning.